Good evening. And on behalf of Fowler and the Gardens Trust, we'd like to welcome you this evening to our talk. And thank you for turning up. My name's Annabel Downs, and I'm going to be introducing this last of the series of our talks. So this evening, we're catching up with the last talk to close this series on top-down or bottom-up community landscapes. We've had four very varied talks on community landscapes. We've looked at the evolution of public housing layouts in the 20th to the 21st century in Sweden, focusing initially on the needs of people and shifting to the needs of cars. And examined one of these estates in a bit more detail, where new work plus refurbishment and restoration was required in response to flooding. The second talk was a review of the rise of volunteers and charitable organisations, the changes in UK legislation associated with EU membership, and the consequent decline of the public sector landscape architect. And it was observed that this has diminished and weakened the landscape profession. The third talk was in the Netherlands, looking at pioneering community work, creating ecologically driven landscapes from the 1970s. Nothing is as new as we think it is. Initially, this was designed by architects and water engineers. Concepts have evolved over time. New models now focus on people and planet, where ecology is integrated and architecture shaped by the landscape. The fourth talk reflected on how the word community has become a word abused and overused by professionals, politicians, journals, and landscape architects, and how community experience has been both welcomed and rebuffed. And we learned how to make participation work from an outsider's bottom-up viewpoint. The talk also explored the role of community gardens, especially pertinent now in a time of wide-scale local authority bankruptcy and many millions of people struggling financially. So the fifth talk is by Ian Baggott, and it's Connecting People, Spaces and Places, a Can of Worms or a Lifetime Commitment. Ian's practice is CFP, a landscape and heritage consultancy, and for over 20 years, he and a small team have delivered over 600 projects, including almost 150 National Lottery Heritage funded schemes. He's written national guidance, led national research, given evidence to parks inquiries and a parks all-party parliamentary group. Amongst other things, he is a collaborator with the Centre for Heritage Research and Training at Swansea University, and has recently been a visiting lecturer at the Welsh School of Architecture. And I'm delighted to hand over the floor to you, Ian. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Annabel, and welcome everybody. Croeso cynnes welcome everybody. I'm sitting in Wales at the moment. Yeah, I've spent my entire career trying to connect people with spaces and places in one way or another. I'm very pleased to see on the attendance list people who've I've been able to collaborate with over that period as well. As Annabel just said, I think we're nearly now at 160 lottery funded projects. And our clients have included people like the National Trust, Woodland Trust, Royal Parks, as you'll see on one of the pictures there. We also do a lot of landscape scale change work more recently, and built-in industrial heritage as well. I'm going to try and pick up some of the themes from David Lambert's talk, which I found absolutely fascinating as well, and how the word community was overused. It was a very good introduction to that, Annabel. Thank you. The word soup of the engagement professional, I think David called it as well. And I wanted to start a little bit with a sketch idea of, sorry, my apologies. I tried to draw a bit of a sketch of a model of this whole concept of top-down versus bottom-up. And I think there are things that are pulling it in different directions. I've called it the project economy. I'm as guilty as anybody. I spent 20 plus years working on restoration projects, on large scale projects, but that project economy in a sense drives short-termism. It's largely capital driven. It's about big money. Sometimes it's a lot about profit. Yet on the other side, we have a more desperate need really for the building of capacity within communities, which is much longer term, which is not big money. It is more revenue driven. And it's less about profit. And it's how projects sit in the middle that we end up all working on collectively. And are those things mutually exclusive, or can projects be bent in such a way to try and build that capacity? David referred to the this project economy in terms of lottery funded projects, about consultancies being brought in to essentially write activity plans, or consultancies doing large scale community consultation. And yeah, I'll hold my hands up. That's what we've been doing for years. But a lot of those plans are very often solely written to get the funding, rather than being something that delivers meaningful change on the ground sometimes. There's a lot of discussion about what is called soft skills as well, which I found a new word in the word soup, which I'll come back to later. But the skill of community consultation, the skill of community engagement, that being able to understand and engage and connect with communities, is something that is undervalued, I would say, at the moment. It seems now that everybody's doing it. Everybody can do consultation, largely driven by the fact that a lot of people can try and make some money from it. But it is a real art, and it is a real skill, and it is a real ability to be able to go out and connect with people. I think the project economy is probably driven largely by government, the thinking that you can throw big money at big shiny things and it will fix everything, or just big money at big things, not necessarily shiny, will solve societal problems. But the truth is, a lot of that is about oiling the wheels of big business, largely. Project economy is driven by time, we've talked about, or driven by cost. Even on lottery projects, you're talking probably up to 10 years, which seems like a long time when you're working on them. But when you have an outcome, that is about making making the area a better place to live, work, or visit, to do that in 10 years is somewhat optimistic, really. But on the other side, if we look at community capacity building, going back to David's talk about bottom-up approaches, when I first started working in urban parks in the early to mid 90s, I set up something called a local involvement program, which is about trying to engage local people with parks. I started reading around and looked back at this piece of work. This is 1969, Sherry Arnstein's Ladder of Public Participation. I've seen Alison Millward's on the list. Alison will know of this. In the American Institute of Planning Journal, I think it was at the time. But she put forward this idea of all these different levels on this ladder of what we were trying to do. And we were trying to understand in Walsall Council at that time, in the Park Service, how far were we willing to go? How far was the local authority willing to go? And how far were local people interested in going? We were looking at the development at that point. Friends groups were a very new thing. We had one. How far did they want to go? What was it they wanted to do? How far did they want to go on this whole process? And how far was the authority willing to let them go as well? We read around the subject. We looked at a lot of other work. We looked at work of people like Amitai Etzioni about individual rights and social responsibilities. We looked at other people as well. We looked at the work, really interesting work about community organising, people like Saul Alinsky's work. And also somebody that I managed to bump into at one point and collaborate with, a guy called Brian Anson. Those of you who are London-based will know about the struggle for Covent Garden. But Brian, as an architect, went so native that the GLC kicked him out. He supported the community and the principles and that local people wanted, that he ended up going native, as they would have called it, really. He was involved in the Architects Revolutionary Council. He was involved in planning aid, where he and a friend of mine, Mike Beasley, spent time in a VW camper traveling the country, trying to provide help and support to communities. And we worked together. I was really lucky that I worked with the two of them on a module about community engagement in urban planning and public policy at Birmingham University, going back nearly 20 years ago. But a lot of this tension is really set up by policy and projects. Private sector driven. A lot of policy is based on the concept of trickle-down economics, that if we chuck loads of money at the private sector, then it will benefit local people eventually. Not necessarily true at all, really. And projects that ministers and everybody, they do love shovel-ready showpiece projects, which drive short-termism again. And the thing is, where does parks fit in all of this? So I'm just going to have a quick run through, really, where government policy has gone, not necessarily in relation to urban parks per se or urban landscapes, but about the community involvement in urban landscapes. Apologies for showing that picture before the watershed, but the whole thing of CCT in the 1980s, compulsory competitive tendering, or enforced tendering, as Manchester City Council called it at the time, was all derived about the outsourcing of public service and the driver of cost over quality. I think at that point they had the concept that the local authority would just meet once a year, and in order to award more contracts to the private sector. But they started to drive down huge amounts of redundancies in local authority park services and a stripping out of quality, which took a very, very long time to turn around, if it's ever been turned around again since. We were lucky, those of us who were around in the mid-90s, when people like Liz Greenhalgh and Ken Walpole did the Comedia Demos report called Park Life. I couldn't find it anywhere at home when I was putting the slides together to add onto this list here. But that prompted a response, interestingly, by a Conservative government into looking at the state of parks at that point in time. And that task force was commissioned. I was involved in that. I was really lucky to have been involved in that and learned an awful lot from my involvement in one of the working groups. And that generated the report on the left there, People, Parks and Cities, a Guide to Current Good Practice. Why am I putting these up? Is because in all of these documents, it talks about the need to engage communities, it talks about the need to work with local people around the provision of park services. And the Green Spaces, Better Places report, again, one of those sections in there, one of the whole publications was around engaging the community, as were the publications on the right-hand side, post-CABE there, CABE Space documents, for those who remember CABE Space times. Again, I was co-authored both of those again. But again, there was a lot of discussion about the need to engage communities in the strategies, in the site-specific management plans, and also in master planning of green spaces. Again, those of us who are old enough will remember ILAM, the Institute of Leisure and Amenity Management. I couldn't find the community involvement in urban parks, but again, there was a publication written in '98, which I wrote with Ian Richardson from Milton Keynes Parks Trust. Again, in that era, the whole idea of talking to the community about parks provision came around. Friends groups were a very, very new thing. Involving the community was a very new thing. It had been local authorities had been a paternalistic provider of parks for over 100 years up until that point. But at this time, it was really interesting that a lot of people were talking about how the communities could get involved, how volunteers could get involved. So along came 97, a political change, but also a thinking really about dismantling CCT and looking at best value, which showed in the original wording, which I've gone back to here, about social value, with considering service provision really, and how local people could then shape local authority service provision. And it did create a significant interest in consulting the community. I'll not say engaging. I think the two are very different. There was a lot of consultation with communities about the design of services. And it also gave a very significant opportunity for a lot of local authorities to bring large-scale park contracts back in-house and take them back from the private sector. I would say the next major policy shift, if indeed it ever was a policy, was the concept from the laughing men on the right, about trying to deliver change, deliver large-scale change by empowering communities, by giving citizens, communities and local government the power and information they need to come together, solve the problems they face and build the Britain that they want. Very interesting concept. I think it was largely possibly Cameron trying to make the Tories look more palatable than under Thatcher. But as the quote says here, charities are great. Volunteering is the future. Transferring assets to communities, great. Social investment rather the WYSI doesn't actually, on reflection, amount to any sort of credible policy platform. That was written with hindsight by one of the people that helped design the whole big society thing, and it didn't generate anything as far as I'm aware. I don't think it lasted that long. Skipping forward to now, we now have this great thing called levelling up, which again is driven about economics. It's about creating jobs and ultimately about supporting communities. But it is, again, largely very big scale capital projects, 20 million projects, 40 million pound projects, that sort of scale of things that are ultimately trying to drive economic change. Within it, I suppose there is a glimmer of hope in that UK SPF stands for UK Shared Prosperity Fund, if anybody's been involved in those. It's where they've actually given money to local authorities to deliver projects, to deliver change, and to design schemes of how they deliver that, which is great. And a lot of really good work is coming out of that in the context of urban landscapes, certainly in a lot of areas. But again, it is a very large amount of money over a very short time, I don't know who came up with the idea that it would be for 2 years and 3 months. So again, it is quite short-termism. And so developing meaningful engagement with communities, lasting engagement that carries on beyond the life of the project itself is quite difficult. If you wanted to know about levelling up, then you don't have to look any further. And it's a document that I keep touting to people repeatedly. I tried to present this back to the all-party parliamentary working group on urban parks a few years ago and reminded them that in Urban Green Nation, going back to 2010, at that point, we knew these facts. And the one that strikes me is the fourth one down, is that we've known since 2010. We've known a lot sooner, but this really solid, credible data set showed us that people from minority ethnic groups tend to have less local green space and is of poorer quality. And there's so much focus on quantity of space, but the quality is the main thing. And we seem to have lost sight of that. And it's only 10 years later, when a pandemic hits us, that we suddenly realize the importance of space and of quality space. But we've known since that long. So if you were serious about levelling up, then you would put your funding there, because as we all know, as a vehicle, developing large scale green space infrastructure type projects and engaging communities with it delivers far greater benefits. Just on that slide there, again, it's a reiteration of that, the statements really. It does talk here about amounts of space, but if you are in a very multicultural community, typically you will have 6 times less green space or public parks than in a predominantly white area as well. But again, it said at that point, investing in parks and green spaces can have a powerful effect in tackling social disadvantage. And I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Some more recent pieces of research, I've been lucky to have worked on all 3 of those. I was quite, as a longitudinal data set, as a longitudinal piece of research, State of UK Parks 2014-16, then funded again by APPG in 2021. What did they show? As well as the decline in space and a decline in local authority service and the local authority budgets and in skills and everything, they did show just how much people valued urban green space. Ipsos Mori and people like that, Britain Thinks, did large-scale national consultation as part of the 14 and 16 editions and just showed how valued they are, how used they are. They are the most used element of local authority, of public service. Everybody uses the bins, obviously, but as a public service, they are incredibly well used and incredibly well valued. They are cultural spaces as well. And that's what I just wanted to touch on in the next section of the talk, really. They're free to access. They're so often located in what were at that time Victorian working class neighbourhoods that are now home to a very diverse and amazing community. And they present an opportunity, therefore, to engage with diverse communities. Apologies to anybody from the Bath Museum at the top. I was just trying to highlight perhaps the difference between a more typical heritage audience and that exists in a park in the West Midlands. So I was just going to use that as a short example, really, to talk about trying to engage, reach. People call them the hard to reach communities. Again, they're not that hard to reach, really. It just takes a bit of time and effort and understanding. And it takes the idea of jumping the park fence. I think it was something like Timothy Marshall in Central Park in New York who talked about programming that jumped the park fence, reaching out and working with communities. So I've picked this one, an 1895 urban park, Victorian park, that was created on land donated by the Chance family. That's the bust commemorating the donor. Chance's Glassworks. If anybody drives down the M5 as you go past West Bromwich Junction 1 heading south, you'll see a very, very big complex of industrial buildings on the east side of the motorway there. That was Chance's Glassworks, which supplied the glass to the Crystal Palace in London, lighthouses around the world as well. So this was an urban park. I've been involved there now for 7 or 8 years. But as I mentioned earlier, it's a very, very diverse community. That slide, if you can all see that, okay, shows you a demographic profile of the borough, and the park is the green area. So it's located in an area which is incredibly diverse. In some areas, 70% plus people from BME backgrounds, sitting next to an 1895 Victorian park. So where did we start? We started by trying to understand about use of the space. And again, I must credit Alison Millward for teaching me all about visitor observation studies. We did a visitor observation study, which means standing in the park, walking around the park and actually looking at who physically uses the space. We mapped where people go as well. We were looking at hotspots. We were looking about safe routes through the site as well. We were looking at people, main entrances that they came in and out of in order to inform the design principles. What were the main entrances? What were the main visitor arrival points? Where was the main interpretation going to be, etc. But also it told us really quite fascinatingly that this was an incredibly well-used space by the local community, that they did use it for physical activity. They use it for an awful lot of events and activities as well, and sports use. So it was very reflective of that demographic in the local area. It also has a very, very troubled past as an area as well. Those of you who may know a little bit about the politics of the area, but how do we deal with this? How did we get across this that was going on in the area? So Marshall Street is a street that is about 50 yards from the park's entrance, maybe. And the story there is that the authority, the Sandwell Council, actually was only allowing the council houses to white people rather than people who were coming into the area. And it got so bad that the Asian Workers Guild, or the Asian workers that were working in the industry locally, invited Malcolm X to come and visit to try and see what was going on. How on earth do we deal with that? How do we deal with engaging with communities? But we need to understand that this has happened as well. So Chance's Glassworks on the left now sits completely derelict. Once, as I said, the home to people who made the glass and the Crystal Palace, one of the biggest glassworks anywhere. But this area is a very big landing point around for people coming in from all over the world still. But there's been some really interesting projects about, on the two images on the right-hand side there, about how to capture that culture through art. And we sort of piggybacked on the back of that, thinking about how we could, again, do those sorts of art-related projects to engage people in the interpretation of the site. And there's a number of pubs in the area which have become called Desi pubs, because they've been taken over. The pubs have been taken over. The running of them have been taken over by families from India who now run them very successfully. But within those pubs, the traditional pubs, these stained glass has been created. So we designed a whole series of projects, but we co-designed them with community leaders. We co-designed them with local artists as a collaboration, really, that would develop and deliver installations that would go on. Within this park was going to be built a new community pavilion. And the idea was that we would try and engage with communities, be it a mosaic project, a textiles project, a glass project, and all of those items would be then built within the new pavilion. It celebrated the fact that when, for instance, Asian men came across to the country and without their families, they worked in the steelworks, they worked in the glassworks locally, as did black men coming across from the Caribbean as well. And how would we connect people? And we thought that we could connect them through a series of community arts projects that would then lead to installations within the site. I was going to show you a film, but apologies, we had a huge technical issue collectively earlier in showing it. We will send the link round. It was a project that I was involved in and Alison was involved in as well, Mary Stevens Park, which is in Stourbridge. And the reason I wanted to show you the film, and you can watch it later online, is that it's a film made about the restoration project. It's a film made by local people, featuring local people. I don't appear in it once. It's all about their experiences and what they wanted to see from the project and how they wanted to celebrate what a good project it was. And I was lucky enough to work on that for about, I think, 6 years. It's very local to me. It's very close to where I live. And my daughters, although they're grown up at university, hate going around that roundabout because they know that every time I go past there in the evenings, I will say that I got those lanterns to work on the top of those gates there. But it is a very beautiful space. Through the restoration project, we did the visitor observation study. We were able to show visitor numbers going up from 600,000 to about 1.3 million. We created a new cafe in the park that was run very successfully. And we did, again, with landscape architects working with us, we did do some amazing restoration works as well. But it was the engagement of the community in those restorations and the documenting of it as well. So if you get a chance, you can always go on YouTube, and if you look for Mary Stevens Park, and it's called Beauty for Everyone, the film, because that's what Ernest Stevens, who donated the land, wanted it for, was for Beauty for Everyone. So if you get a chance, it's 6 minutes, I think. So apologies we can't show that tonight, but we've had too many technical issues trying to show it. But it is a really great project. I saw this interesting section on LinkedIn quite recently, and I thought it was quite relevant to what we're talking about tonight. Somebody had posted, how can you become an expert in community engagement as a landscape architect? My initial response was, why not work with the people who are experts in the first place? Or why not engage the community to do that work? Think about it slightly differently. Are there people in the community that could do the consultation and engagement work? If you can't do that, then try and get trained up. And I would say the difficulty there is very little, if any, training about how to go about community consultation and engagement. But possibly also steer well clear of projects where you feel community engagement is something that is tokenistic. Don't do it at all. I've just sketched out some thoughts. These are just thoughts about what I would do. How would I approach it if I was getting involved? I think it's about researching the community and the demographics, the dynamics, the values, the issues, the needs. What is really going on in that area before you even set foot in it? Do you really understand everything that's going on? Reading up on what has gone on previously. Reading previous consultation is really enlightening. How it was done, who got involved, who didn't get involved, what was said, how feedback was given, what really came out of stuff to that point in time. I think also finding, I call them gatekeepers, people who can get you into local situations, people who are community leaders, people who will collaborate with you, people who will work with you on the particular project. This is always assuming that it isn't their project in the first place, but in this instance, I'm suggesting it perhaps isn't. Thinking about how you will consult with people, how you will engage with people, making sure it's accessible. accessible techniques, physically accessible as well, culturally and accessible, and in terms of language as well. I would strongly avoid community meeting style events. You just get shouted at, and it's by a vociferous minority, and I don't think they work. They don't hear the views of everybody. We would tend to go for more drop-in style events or workshops events or facilitated events. Avoid books on walls. I see so many consultation exercises, which is a master plan with 6A0 boards of text that 4 people can read at any one time. And it really just doesn't work at all. Provide feedback as well. If you are going to do consultation, where is it going to be written up? Where is it going to be shared? How do people know what they have said has made any difference whatsoever? And encourage engagement. How does what you do fit into the longer scheme of things? How will people get involved in the future? How do you move them from consultation to engagement? I see engagement as being something where people are far more actively involved rather than consultation where they are giving views. How can you move them along that sort of pathway? If you're thinking about pathways, you could think about things like how will success be measured? You could think about, this is an idea of a logic model or evaluation framework for a project we're engaged in. But thinking about, so many projects are output driven, numbers of things, 10 hectares restored, 1 building fixed, 300 people involved, which are largely, I would say, largely meaningless. But think more about outcomes, those things that are more qualitative, that are more experiential. As a result of their involvement, they did what they went on to do, what they were inspired to do, what, rather than just numbers of people. And impacts, I would argue that impacts are much longer term and usually not realized during the life of the project necessarily. Much bigger things, social benefits, environmental benefits, are more difficult to realize. Again, in landscape scale change, on a 5-year project, you're not going to necessarily restore a landscape so it is where you want it to be. So you're looking for maybe short-term indicators that are showing you that you're moving along the right path. So I would say think about it in that way. Just to sort of move towards the last few slides, really. I call these reasons to be cheerful. There's only part 1 and part 2. There isn't a part 3. I'll leave that to you in jury. The reasons to be cheerful, part 1. I think there are some elements where things could change. I think changing what our measures of success are about. I had a really interesting talk earlier today. I'm at a conference about industrial heritage, about it was about the regeneration of Manchester. But somebody there questioning what the measures of success were in terms of the large-scale redevelopment of parts of the city. What were the measures of success? Is it economic growth, or is it more about communities? I would argue when we're working on landscapes and urban parks, essentially, they are nothing without people. So it should be about engaging with people. It should be about behavioural change. It should be about quality of life. I would always argue for investing in urban green space. I would also argue, if I were to be talking to government, about stopping regeneration bidding. Bidding wars, bidding for money falls into the hands of those who've got the time and the skills and the experience to bid, which is usually not those in most need. Substitution versus additionality. What I mean there is going back to the talk about the rise of volunteering, is that community involvement and volunteering should be about additionality. It should be about building on top of service delivery. It shouldn't be a substitution for service delivery. It shouldn't be an absence of service delivery, which it has tended to become in a lot of areas due to austerity-driven cuts. Part 2, I would say, if we can, we should try and design more programs rather than individual projects. So interwoven projects that all work together to try and do things, and you can achieve far more that way. Projects, if they could, should be longer. On a lot of restoration projects, you're probably looking, as I said earlier, about from start to finish, maybe 10 years, but the delivery phase of it, where you actually restore the landscape or create the new buildings or whatever, you're then left with 2 or 3 years post capital works to try and deliver a lot on the community outcomes if you're dependent on that building or facility. So having longer, skinnier projects rather than shorter, fatter projects is probably a better way of doing it. I would also argue for inclusive project design from the very outset, trying to understand needs of communities and needs of individuals and aspirations and how they'd like to be involved. On the individual side, on the people side, I don't know of anywhere really, I beg to be told otherwise, that does more about soft skills training, about how to work with communities. Again, I would argue for collaboration. I think we are all better on these projects where we all come together irrespective of our disciplines and professional background. The most exciting ones I've ever worked on is where that happens, where everybody just rolls their sleeves up and gets stuck into it, whether you're an architect, a landscape architect, a QS, whatever it is, all working together and collaborating does make for amazing projects. The one that I haven't talked about lengthily about is Margam, where I've been working for 3 years now on the feasibility of the restoration of that castle that I'm standing on the top of. And that has been a very, very collaborative experience between the community. We have 3 universities on board. We have the Field Studies Council on board. We have a lot of local volunteer groups on board as well. And that has made it a really, truly brilliant project. And we're not even at round 1 yet. We're still doing the feasibility. I would advocate for respecting each other's skills and experience as well. And what do I mean by that? I mean by the fact that my practice, we're not landscape architects. We will collaborate and work with landscape architects. We will work with anybody. And we're very mindful and respectful of the skills and experience that people like that have to bring to the table. I think sometimes there's not enough respect for those people who come from other disciplines and other backgrounds as well, and bigger practices poaching into those sort of areas rather than working with. And I would also say leave something behind better than when you started. I mean, that's why we're all here, isn't that's what we're all trying to do anyway. So having that dedication to the whole thing, that's what you're trying to do. So finally, just to sum up, I think we should be in that green box in the middle. The question mark is that's where we should be, whether we're green space managers, landscape architects, community planners. That's what we should be doing. We should be the bridge between the top down and the bottom up. We should be bending the projects to try and get the most out of them. We need to use our professional skills, our experience, our position, our influence, wherever we have such a thing, to benefit other people. We do need more people who have those facilitation and enabling and organising skills. We need more people who are advocates and activists who are willing to challenge that top-down approach. We need people really who are willing to give time, skills and energy to enable the bottom-up, who are not always concerned about the fee, but can try and work with communities to make better projects. And I think we need to be willing to challenge, dismantle and rebuild projects that don't adequately engage, to co-design and collaborate, not just to make beautiful things, which we can all do, but to deliver societal environmental change, and also being mindful of what you leave behind, if indeed you ever leave. I think on some areas it gets under your skin and you just have to stay. And I think that's where the most enjoyment does come. Forget about the fees and see what you really can achieve. And thank you. That's my last slide. Thank you for your time.
Ian, that was just stunning. Really fantastic. Really interesting. I think the hanging on with projects is an extraordinary thing. And I've recently sort of done some work on Jellicoe and at the Kennedy Memorial, he stayed involved with that project for 20 years. Wow. After it was finished. I mean, just extraordinary, and tweaked and, like in some instances had sort of quite important influence on what happened, because the memorial stone was blown up and he said, no, don't put it all in the barrow, we'll fix it. And and another job was for 60 years. I mean, just amazing. So I think you're absolutely right. But anyway, Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Helen, who's going to ask a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
Helen, thank you.
Okay, hello. Right. Well, Annabelle's already asked one in the chat, and that is, have you turned, or have you turned down any jobs as a starter?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're really selective about what we do. I suppose we're lucky in that we've been going 20 years. And we're quite, yeah, we don't take on everything. We're not driven by turnover. We've got more than enough work to do. There are 9 of us, and we're busy all the time. We do turn down jobs, and yeah, if the brief looks like it's just not worth doing ethically, I think there's an ethical judgment. There's always that, can we do it in the time? Have we got the skills and experience? Is that really, is that the budget for it? But there's also a thing that says, actually, I don't think this sits really well. We've got a real moral dilemma that we've been in for a few years now about this whole thing of writing activity plans in this development phase, of employing a consultant that comes in from miles away to write a plan about how to engage and how to work with the community and how to deliver activity in there, because we feel that a lot of them are being written solely to get the bid, and then once the money's through, they're not worked to at all. They're changed very fundamentally. I think there's something like we've been steering away from them. I think we did our last one maybe 2 years ago now. It's I don't know what it is about them. So we do turn down work. Yes, we do. But in the flip side of that, I've worked with as a community trust in the West Midlands, Warley Woods Community Trust. If you ever get a chance to go there, go there. Amazing landscape. Repton landscape, run by a community trust, run by a trust for 20 years now. We've worked for them for 15, I think. I don't think we've charged a fee for the last 10. So again, Alison's got her hand up.
Yes, Alison, would you like to come in on this, the question that you posted?
Hello, Ian.
Hello, Alison.
Thank you for the acknowledgements. Much appreciated. I think what I want. I mean, I'm an activity planner, or was, now in retirement, but I always saw them as the thing that enabled me to advocate the needs of the community as they emerged through the consultation process. And then when those plans eventually found their hands into the community ranger who was employed, I'm thinking, who I'm thinking of, Debbie Merrick, Stephen. Debbie turned up with my activity plan and rolled up in her back pocket for a briefing session. And she said, because it had the budget and it had a list of what I was supposed to be doing and with who and how many of these sorts of activities I should be delivering, it became her work programme, and her, and she had targets against which to judge, what she was achieving over a period of time. So I would like to think that my activity plans were partly advocacy and partly a sort of practical work programming document for those who were meant to deliver them at the end of the day. The point, if I may, the point I wanted to make, Ian, because through my 40 years of engaging with communities, engagement changes local people's relationship with their open space. It creates anxiety and pressures and worries. So you no longer, people I've interviewed over the years, you no longer just take a stroll down the park. You're on the lookout, your antennae are up all the time for the latest act of vandalism or something weird that's been dumped on the site with or the council's brought some leftover trees and put them in entirely the wrong place, or whatever it might happen to be. But you are then sensitized to that space, and you then have that lifelong attachment to it, but through much more understanding eyes of what works and what can go significantly wrong. I certainly feel like that now about my local project that I volunteered with for 6-7 years. on the other side of the fence, and I'm conscious of the impact my work engaging communities will have had on the people, the key active people in those communities. It becomes, if as long as you live there, and sometimes after you've moved away, you know, you don't lose that connection with those spaces, and you feel kind of duty bound to keep an eye on them. So we should be mindful of that.
No, I would agree. I think that's why I titled the whole thing about, you know, a can of worms or a lifelong commitment, you know, that you can, once you get under the skin of an area and you start working with people, it's very hard to walk away, isn't it? Really, really hard to walk away. And you use the word impact there, which I think is really interesting, isn't it? In that, where is the post-project impact assessment of all of this? If we're truly about impact, then why on some of these big projects, why does it all stop at the contract end when the impact is actually felt a lot longer? You know, walking around a park 5 years after the project's closed, the park will look pretty much like it looked. But what about the communities? What about the engagement of the volunteers when those staff have been on short-term contracts? I think that is quite an interesting one about how these projects that we've all been working on for 20 years have engendered, like you say, a lot of community pride and a lot of community activity, but who carries on supporting it afterwards? How does it carry on, and how does that impact? How is it looked at afterwards is a question, really.
Thank you, Alison. I'm just going to bring in Helen Tranter. Helen, would you like to speak for your question, or shall I read it out? Well, Helen Tranter is asking, how important do you think friends groups are for protecting parks in the long term?
Good one. Thanks, Helen. It's a really difficult one, isn't it? I think that's a really, really difficult question, because I would say that they should be fundamentally important. But in protecting them, the word protecting is where I'm stuck, Helen, to be absolutely honest. Protection, Liverpool has designated all of their green space, haven't they? That with Fields in Trust, it's all protected. No, it's not. It's not protected. A designation doesn't protect the space at all. What protects the space is active community engagement and a decent revenue budget and a long-term vision. That's what protects it, really. How important are friends groups? Fundamentally important, I think, engaging the community. I would say community engagement is important. I think the difficulty I've had some points in friends groups is that they're not representative of that community. Therefore, whose agenda are you working to? So I would say community engagement is fundamental to protecting, developing, enhancing green spaces in the future. I think friends groups have a major role to play in that, and people like the Federation that Dave Morris runs have been absolutely incredible in what they have achieved and supporting local authorities. But again, it's that thing that it should be additionality, shouldn't it? Not substitution. We shouldn't be looking to friends groups to fill the gap left by austerity cuts or to raise money that the council can't raise. So I think they are important, but I would widen it to say it's the engagement of the wider community is the most important. I don't know if you'd agree, Helen.
Well, I mean, they help in a democracy when local councillors want to get voted in again. It helps to have somebody putting pressure on the parts. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly. It did work when I was at Welsh School Council for about 8 or I can't remember how many years I was there, but we went from one friends group to about 10. I think they've got, oh God, I don't know how many they've got now, but we formed them into a network. We set up a friends group network to try and help people come together, but also to be advocates for each other as well. So if I went into a particular community at a request of the community, because I had the council badge on, I would always take with me the chair of another group, so that they could go into that community and say, you can trust these people from the council. They are going to work with you. You know, they are genuine enough as well. And that network reached really well. I think it's still going now. That did work, having them as advocates one of the chairs, actually, that chair that used to go with me ended up being leader of the council. So it did work in the end of the day. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome. Nice to see you, Helen. So.
You.
I'd like to ask a question as well, Ian, is that role, in an earlier talk, there was obviously discussions about where landscape architects were employed, and that the local authority public service aspect of our professional life has really, really shrunk. And when you talk about the roles that of a friends group, if you don't have the support within the local authority to be like an underpinning that keeps things rolling, a small amount of investment, well, a lot of time, but maybe some obviously financial investment in friends groups, it's really it's an abdication of responsibility, I would say. And I mean, every single park in my authority has now got a friends group, which is really good, excellent. But there's not a network, and it's not very public. And as you say, the recruitment to friends groups can be quite narrow. Unless you've got a local authority that's got the facilities to see that they're making sure that the outreach is to all communities and not just self-selecting. So there's a weakness.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, Helen. It is a really valid point, isn't it? If you go back, if you look through State of UK Parks 2016, again in 2021, we looked at where had most of the cuts been, and a lot of the cuts were in developmental side of things. I've got this idea of a Venn diagram of management, maintenance, and development, and it was that developmental side that had taken the biggest hit. And they're the people who should be working with community groups. So it was the rangers, the community engagement staff. And I see it time and time and time again that the education interpretation people are now the events managers because they make more money out of events. And you see that a lot in London, obviously, don't you, in terms of, the commercialization of green space. So that whole thing of having somebody, that was my team's job. I had this local involvement program, and it was our job to provide that support to friends groups. So we weren't saying, oh, we need X number of groups. We were just trying to support those groups to make sure that they understand what their rights were, that what their responsibilities were, what we could do, what they could do, how far we could go with each other in the relationship, but also to build capacity. So, we would run evenings, which was about running events in parks. We would bring people in to talk about fundraising or different things as well. So you're right. Yeah. Without some team or some individuals who are supporting those groups, it's fundamentally wrong. But that's what austerity cuts have driven people to. It's all driving you to where can you make money from rather than how can you support communities. And it's the wrong way of looking at it. It's just the whole thing of expenditure, isn't it? Just looking at the bottom line of expenditure, about looking at the income side of things that those groups could bring in, or the added value that they bring in, or the volunteer contributions that they bring in. Those groups that you've just talked about bring in tens of thousands of pounds a year in volunteer in-kind support. So you only need one member of staff and you could double that, triple that. So it's just thinking about it in a different way, isn't it, really?
I think, not my experience, but the tendency, I think, is the issue about budgets and the cuts to local authorities has made them very narrow focused and not thinking about the long term anymore, which is, as you're talking about, the experience that you see is that the success comes from that long term engagement with landscapes or projects or places. That it's the places and people long term that produce the results.
I would pick up your point, Helen, as well. You're exactly right about the depletion of landscape architects within local authority services as well, and how valuable it is to have local authority landscape architects as well, who know the areas, who've worked there for years, who understand the communities, who can provide the link in, and who can work alongside. So I was in parks, but upstairs there was a planning team who had, I think, 4 landscape architects, and we would collaborate. We would go together we would work together on schemes. You know, I'm not a landscape architect, you know, so I need somebody to come with me to come and try and understand what they're saying and convey it into some sort of drawings, into something. So we ended up employing a community landscape architect, and that's that person's job, was to perform that role, to try and help people interpret plans and to produce plans as well. Too much consultation is a two-dimensional technical drawing, isn't it? Some of us can read, and it's been a real huge depletion of that, really. And also those people are so fundamentally to developing the project in the first place. You know, a lot of us come into a project, and I've seen it time and time and time again, you know, where somebody stands up and gets an award for a project and it's not their project at all. If it wasn't for local authority landscape architects and local authority parks professionals, we wouldn't have had X hundred HLF funded park restoration schemes. They've all come from that genesis, that starting point, that thinking, and it's them who developed the project and idea. And a lot of those landscape architects have been lost, sadly.
Okay. I'm just going to ask Helen, did you want to say something, Helen?
I suppose I was just wanted to emphasise the importance of any parks professional, whether they're landscape architect or landscape manager or anything else, acting as an internal advocate within a local authority, because when you're doing the annual budget every year, it's a competitive process. Highways say, I want it for roads. Social services say, I want it for old people. You need somebody in there say, I want it for parks, whether it's development or maintenance or management. And so that's why we really do need motivated and trained people inside local authorities acting as advocates.
Actually, could I ask on that point about your background, Ian? Because you keep saying that you're not a landscape architect. So I was just wondering, what by what means did you become involved in the?
Oh, how long have you got?
Oh, well, you can give
The
it
weird thing is, Helen,
a brief outline.
The brief outline. The weird thing, Helen, is I'm sitting in Bangor University, where I graduated 40 years ago, almost to the point, with a degree in marine zoology. So I don't know. My background is that I became an unemployed student and I went into practical conservation. So I've gone from building footpaths up Snowdon to working in conservation charities, which involve working with volunteers, to then being a landscape officer in a local authority, not a landscape, but a landscape officer, tree and landscape officer, Shrewsbury Council, to working for the urban forestry unit, if people remember those days. My connection with parks came from the fact that I was employed to run a public parks project in about 93. And that's how I got into urban parks and urban landscape through that. And then went to the local authority and then went into private practice. So, yeah.
Thank you. It's really fascinating, because I think that's the thing about the diverse, you know, what you bring. I mean, you know, obviously landscape architect's got a kind of professional career trajectory, but the fact that if you come from a slightly different angle, what you bring to the table is so rich and informs our designer practice as well. And I was just wondering whether you thought that there should be some, you're talking about the consultation and participation with communities, the soft skills. Do you think there's a course that covers that, or do you think
I'm not sure that there is, to be absolutely honest, Helen. I'm not sure. I learned it by doing. I don't know. I learned it by shadowing brilliant people like Alison Millward at some points and stuff like that as well. But I don't think there is anything that sort of captures it, really. And therefore it becomes this void into which a lot of people say they are suddenly experts in and start doing, you know, just I think it's an area where there's just not enough developed. And you are right. I mean, I would wholeheartedly agree with you that where we're all best is where we all share and collaborate and come from it from lots of different experiences and lots of different backgrounds. And then you create and deliver some amazing projects. You really can do. And it's about that recognizing each other's skills, isn't it? And working with different professions does make the best projects.
Yes, I'm hogging this. So does anybody else want to ask questions? Please do put your hands up and just open up your video and mic and ask? No? Okay. I just want to say thank you so much, Ian. It's been very revealing. I think what you've done is, for me, is you've kind of, things that swirl around my mind, you put into words. And what I liked, particularly the project economy. I've been on the receiving end of that twice on big projects, and I think that's a really interesting way to express the inevitable format that the project economy forces onto things that really are not really relevant. Talking about big public park restoration projects, to be left without real oversight and demands from the funders to make sure that what's done is cared for long term is truly a terrible waste of public money, actually. That's not been the case in both projects, but certainly for one. And yeah, I think it's a minefield, but also a really interesting way to look at things. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Annabel now. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Wow, Ian, that was fantastic. I think we're all going to have to go away and think about what you said and sort of and then come back and send you a bunch more questions. I've got one more question, if I may ask, and that is, I wonder, and I might be saying this the wrong way, and it might be wrongly contentious, but have there been any sort of historic landscapes that you worked on that have been, you know, that people don't feel a connection with, and they want to have, they want to see a change there, which you might feel that you have wanted to resist?
Oh, that's a really good one. I suppose that sort of tension comes in when you've done so many projects, doesn't it? When you become more of a landscape professional than a community professional. If you were a true community professional advocate of the community, there wouldn't be any resistance, would there? You know, you'd say, "Oh, that's a great idea. Let's go and do it."
Yes.
And then the professional bit of your brain kicks in and going, "Well, that'll never work."
Well, not that it will never work, but it could be that it's sort of like it's, you know, you're digging up Stonehenge, or
yeah. No, I don't think.
Not that.
I don't think there ever have been. I think it's coming back to that point of dismantling a project at some points in time to try and understand whether or not it is what the community needs. I think it depends on how much the project you get involved in at what point, and how much has been done before to ensure that. Because consultation on a public space is never a blank sheet of paper, is it? You can't do it. You know, there are always constraints, but I suppose it's how you explain those constraints to people and how you frame the consultation, rather than trying to constrain them, how you just frame it to say these are the sort of things we could do, and that's how you then. I think the flip side is more, how do you, where you've got low aspirations in a particular community, how do you inspire them, rather than how do you constrain at the other end, which is what you know, how do you resist or push back against something? I think in a lot of areas what we found is that people are so used to dealing with the rubbish that they are provided with in that part, that they think it can't be any better. You know, I live in this area, these are the sort of services, these are the issues in my neighbourhood. Can't be any greater. And I think that the challenge there is showing them that it can. Sometimes it's chucking them on a minibus and driving them somewhere else and going, you can have that. So I've never really, no, I've not had that. I'm really lucky, I must say. I've not had that really.
So there's a comment come from Jonathan who says,
yeah, just reading that.
Oh, right. Oh, good. Oh, good. So you've been really helpful for him.
Well, you can put my email address on what you circulate around. I'm happy if anybody wants to speak to me at any point. I'm more than happy to chat to people. So if you are,
it's wonderful. I will.
Feel free, Jonathan, wherever you are and whoever you are, to drop me a line.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's so generous.
A pleasure.
And when are you going to set up your training course?
I'm due to retire. I've got too much to do as it is.
No, you can't retire. There's no such thing as retirement.
No, I've been told that repeatedly recently. So, yes.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much. really brilliant, really fantastic, and wonderful finale for this series.